Hello and welcome back everyone. I am making this video to introduce the 15-part honor mode that I have recorded and uploaded to YouTube. And I wanted to do this video to help you kind of contextualize it and understand what's going on in that run. I mean, I ultimately did it for fun, but I also wanted to do it to demonstrate and show a playthrough with a set of rules or limitations that I wanted to put on to the game to make it feel a little bit more like there were a reasonable DM presiding over a tabletop game and less like um, less like some of the things in BG3 that I think are completely out of hand. And you'll see what I mean as we get into these rules. So, for example, I there when you play BG3, you could just, for example, long rest all the time, all the time, all the time. And I know from playing with a couple different DMs on tabletop that that would probably drive a reasonable DM absolutely insane after a certain amount of time. And they would either start de-incentivizing your long rests by frequently interrupting it with combat, which rarely happens in Baldur's Gate 3, or they might impose some other sort of limitation on you so that you can't just like do 2 fights, long rest, rinse and repeat. Anyway, also, for example, at a tabletop game, you can't just save scum, which I mean, we have honor mode, so I don't think there are a lot of people who are like into super save scumming when they're doing most of their playthrough these days. But you know, just little things like that. I do want to state very clearly that I do not view this rule set, do not view my way of playing the game as hardcore. Uh, Hardcore, I think, would be doing things like solar honor mode. Hardcore, I think, would be doing things like if a companion dies, they're gone entirely. Or I think the solo really is the best option because, sure, you might be doing all sorts of cheese strats. You might have camp companions casting Warding Bond on you. You might have like characters running away back to Withers to keep things alive. But because you only have one character in every combat, you're doing it quote unquote solo. That is a very hardcore way of playing the game, even if you're burning through resources, long resting every combat. I respect that level of gameplay. I think that is hardcore. Similarly, the speed runs, where all sorts of glitches are used, all sorts of crazy things are used, those are hardcore too. I view that as like hardcore. But I don't think that bears any resemblance to tabletop gameplay, like at all, either of those cases. And I wanted this to kind of feel like tabletop gameplay more so than just base Baldur's Gate 3 honor mode, but not cross into hardcore territory where it's just completely unplayable. So the next thing I did is I put limited long rests on. And the reason I put limited long rests after the honor mode no reloads karmic dice is the story in Baldur's Gate 3 uh, crosses up against itself. On the one hand, yes, I recognize you miss story beats by not long resting frequently. So if you're a true story player, you'll long rest all the time to catch all the story beats. Um, but there's a ton of urgency in the plot of Baldur's Gate 3. And so I kind of sat down and thought, how long a time period do I think a DM would reasonably think these events have to happen over? And my guess was about 2 weeks. So 14 adventuring days. Well, how many nights intervene across 14 days? 13 nights. So I allowed myself for the totality of this entire run 13 long rests. Now, I counted certain things as exceptional. If, for example, sometimes you're not trying to long rest, but you port from the Creche to the Underdark or something like that, or you port from the into the mountain pass, and it forces a long rest. Generally, I don't count that as a long rest. There are certain forced long rests between acts as well. You'll see in the playthrough that I don't technically count those, but I did actually manually long rest around those time periods, so I count the manual long rests. So those are exceptions. I don't count those as long rests in terms of my counter. I just kind of pretend that there was an interruption, the DM did something, and I don't consider it actually a night, even though, you know, you look in the game and it's nighttime. The other thing is because there are so many story scenes that can only come out one at a time after a long rest, the other thing I'll do is you can long rest, leave camp, immediately return to camp, partial rest, or if you consume the food, that you're just a sucker for doing that. So I don't count that as a bad thing. That doesn't add extra long rest. But you can do a bunch of long rests back to back to back to back that way, and I'll count that whole group as one long rest, and just pretend you had one really really hectic night with lots of dreams and parties. That happens. Totally a real thing, right? It's just like your DM decided to cram all the story beats into one long rest, which I think is also kind of reasonable. My next limitation is no pickpocketing or cheesing vendors, and it's not no pickpocketing. Like, I like pickpocketing, but I think the idea of going up to Damon, pickpocketing him, taking all his gold, or taking all his stuff and selling it back to him, stuff like that. I think that's just really cheesy and unhelpful and also really tedious, so I just banned it. This is a big controversial one. I ban scrolls in combat basically because the way scrolls are implemented in BG3, there's not a lot of benefit to actually being certain spellcasting classes because you can cast anything off of any scroll that you can find, right? So it really does tend to trivialize actually having the classes that have certain spell lists. Now, I could have done with a more granular distinction, like you can only cast scrolls from your spell list or whatever, but I also just think it's fun to actually play with limited spell resources. There are a lot of scrolls in BG3. If you're casting a lot of scrolls, then you're saving a lot of spell slots, and you're losing some of the tactical fun of having limited long rests. So I go fully no scrolls, but I'd also respect if someone else wanted to modify this as like you can only cast a scroll if it's on your spell list, or any other sort of like reasonable tabletop change you would make to that. I call my fifth rule don't split the party, and the idea is you don't switch your companions. You have your four, you keep them together throughout the game. Now you can like bring a certain companion to a story event. I think the obvious ones are like if I had actually gotten Jaheira to work in this playthrough, I would have taken Jaheira to her home, and I took Asteria to a Raj, and then immediately, had him suck a Raj's blood and then kicked him back to camp. Like you can do little things like that, but you can't take a different companion to combat outside of the like certain situations super early game before you find all the companions. Once you have your group, you keep your group together, and that's the group you're going into every combat with. I also limit respecs, so you can only do a respec basically during the long rest, like after you click end of day and before you leave camp again to do an adventuring day. And it can only happen at certain story points. Either you just got withers and you're fixing all the companion stats, that's fair, or it's one of the major story events for a character. For example, Shadowheart in the Shadowfell, or you cooled Karlach's heart, or Mistra just told Gale to blow himself up, or Lae'zel just made the deal with Kithrak Voss. Like all of those, I think, are very good story events that can say, yes, you get one free respec here. For Tav, I think the best place to do that would be when the Dream Guardian has been revealed as the Emperor. And for Dirge, I think there are a couple different points you could choose to do that, but I didn't have a Dirge, so I didn't pick my one. So if you're going to play this, feel free to pick that 1 point for Dirge and let me know what you think. I also wanted to limit two groups of items that I think are just completely broken. Now, there are a lot of items that do stacks in BG3. There's the Reverberation stack, there's mental fatigue stack, there's Radiant Orb stack, there's Arcane Acuity stack. I think a real human DM would completely lose their mind with trying to track those in combat. So I don't think any human DMs are actually going to allow any of those items in their playthrough. But I went for a slightly more mediating position where I just banned the ones that I think get the stacking too high too fast. And my two categories are one, from the Radiant Orb set, the Luminous Armor in Act 1, because of the Radiant Shockwave AoE effect, is just too broken. I just ban it. The fact that it's so easy, especially once you have a Light Cleric already with their Channel Divinity, to instantly stack 6 stacks of Radiant Orb on a bunch of enemies at once, that's just game breaking. -6 to hit is really big. Really not fair in my opinion, so I just decided to ban that item. Just not going to play with it. The other ones were the Acuity stacking helmets, and I just all of them. They're all really fun. I usually use them in playthroughs. I love them. Arcane Acuity is so fun to play with, but I really don't think a reasonable human DM is going to give you an easy way to get a +10 to your spell attack rolls and spell save DC. Um, just gets too high too fast, especially because it's 2 stacks per proc for all of them. So I just banned them. Again, I love it. I love doing them on other playthroughs, but for this rule set, I just decided to ban them. I have a general no cheese rule that I just apply when I see people do things like barrelmancy or doing the stealth strats where you stay permanently out of combat and just keep getting sneak attacks. I don't hate those. I personally find them really tedious and don't enjoy them. Um, and I think they're core components of true hardcore runs, but they're not the vibe that I was going for, so they're not banned. And then 10 is still a work in progress. I would like to improve this from what I have because I want to restrict the availability of potions and elixirs more than already has been done. But I just stuck with you can't buy alchemy ingredients. You can farm alchemy ingredients and you can buy finished potions and elixirs, but you can't buy the ingredients to then supplement what you don't have to make more potions and elixirs. I am still working on refining that rule. I think there's probably a better balance of fun that removes some of the tedium. Um, but I've been hesitant to commit to things like not gathering ingredients. Feels like the game's giving those to you, so it feels bad to just tell them the game's not giving them to you. Uh, Not quite the same as banning, very limited sets of items. Just say never pick up an alchemy ingredient. So I'm thinking about that. You guys let me know what makes sense. There are different ways to do all of these that are fun. But bear in mind as you watch through the run that I'm posting that I'm playing under these rules. So that explains a lot of points where you're watching and you think, oh, he should do X, and I just don't. It's probably because it's on this rule set. I had a lot of fun recording the run. It's very much an imperfect run. There were a bunch of crashes, particularly in Act 2, which was a problem I did seem to get solved. I did find out that certain programs, running certain programs in the background was probably taking more memory away than I thought it was, and was causing either processor or memory issues, depending on which program it was. So I fixed that and was generally able to be pretty stable. I think my last crash of the game um, was in the fight where you defend the Dream Guardian, which technically wasn't in the fight. It was really weird. It was on a jump. Um, but the rest of the game, things generally went pretty well. So yeah, not much to say there. Um, yeah, there was a crash in the Kresh region, so technically in the Monastery region. 2 or 3 other crashes in Act 2. Um, and yeah, because it's honor mode, I couldn't perfectly replicate what I had done pre-crash when I was able to get back in, so you'll see that. Um, yeah, I mean, if you want to accuse me of cheating where the certain crashes are, like one, I don't care. This is a for fun run, so cheating doesn't make sense. And two, um, the crashes made me do Merkle twice, so there's that. So yeah, I'll just leave it at that. Um, Doing Merkle twice is actually quite funny because it demonstrates how strong the party comp is that I was able to do that fight so easily multiple times. But other than that, had a lot of fun. Hope you also have fun with rules and builds like this. Yeah, let me know in the comments what adjustments you might make in your own runs to make this fun. Because again, this is about trying to have fun in the game. So if you have very different rules and limitations that help you have more fun, I'd love to hear what they are. And otherwise, I hope you enjoy combing through the playthrough I have. I don't believe anybody will watch the whole thing, but if there are certain fights you want to see how I did, if there are certain points that you're really interested in, I hope you enjoy combing through that, watching that, and letting me know your thoughts. Thank you for watching and have fun.